Hey guys, what is up? I'm pretty pumped to be bringing you my first Dark Souls Remastered video. I actually haven't had that much time to play. I only have 30 hours into a single character, and then about another hour that I just started on another character. This game, uh, it's a definitely a different game from DS3, and I'll get into some of the reasons why here that I think it's so different and why it feels so different. But actually, before I get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Tea Leaf and Old Rabid One. My wife and I were in the UK on vacation. So one of the reasons actually I haven't played very much, and we had an opportunity to hook up with both those guys independently, and just had a ton of fun with both of them. So thanks to both those guys for taking time out of their busy schedules to meet up with us and show us around a little bit. We had a ton of fun. um, so Dark Souls Remastered, as I said, I've only played about 30 hours. So the opinions I have here are sort of very preliminary. I don't have any hard opinions about this game yet, other than I suck. Most of what I learned in Dark Souls 3 is really not that applicable to this game. Some of the very basic elements, spacing, things like that, are certainly applicable. But the game plays so differently, and we'll talk a little bit about what I see as the most important differences between the games. You probably already know what a lot of them are. I think the first thing is planning. So if you're making a build, you're getting ready to run through the game, you have to plan your character out a hell of a lot more than you did in Dark Souls 3. You don't have the ability to respec the characters, so your decisions with regards to levels are permanent. Um, and then in combination, there's so many different build types in Dark Souls 1. And actually, I think it's one thing that Dark Souls 1 did really well. There's a number of different types of builds, and many of them are viable. There's no one single build type. It's not like the quality builds of Dark Souls 3, especially in the early days of Dark Souls 3. You have to make some decisions about your build type. Even how you roll is a big decision you have to make. I think there's, roughly speaking, three or four different role types, but even within some of those roles, there's finer grades of different role types, meaning there may well be eight or nine, not nine. I think there's probably seven or eight actually different role types that you can have. And because each role type is associated with a very narrow band of your equip load, you really need to put a lot of thought into what that's going to be. And you have to think about the armor you're going to wear. You have to think about the weapons you're going to keep equipped. If you're going to swap, what are those other weapons? Because you don't want to suddenly find yourself fat rolling. It's a whole lot of thought that has to go into your builds. You have permanent covenants, and I understand in the remaster they've softened that up a little bit, but for the most part, when you join covenants, you're making a somewhat permanent decision, or at least a decision that you're going to have to stick with for quite some time. One of the other things about this game is the PvP in particular is not noob friendly in any way at all. In Dark Souls 3, if you were a good PvE player, you could have some success in PvP. You wouldn't be good. It takes practice even in Dark Souls 3. But in Dark Souls 1, a lot of the mechanics are really esoteric. Poise in particular, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the various breakpoints. There's just an awful lot that you have to know, and a lot of it's not obvious at all. Toggle escaping, and there's obviously quite a bit more. But it is not a noob friendly game. And I think that's actually one of the things that more skilled players like about this game is that there's a sort of greater separation in skill between bad and good players. There's a lot larger sort of returns to skills that you build up in this game. When you look at like Dark Souls 3, the separation between a player like me and like a top tier player is not totally obvious. Now, when I play a player like that, it's obvious to me. But unless somebody knows a lot about the game and would watch us play, they would see the other player do better than me, but it's not really clear why. And it's usually just they space a little bit better, their timing's a little bit better, they just do everything a little bit better. The pacing of this game is a lot slower, plodding almost. I think I told somebody it's like a chess match instead of table tennis. Dark Souls 3 is like table tennis. You really have to plan your moves in advance. You have to think carefully about what you're doing. You can't spam in any way. You obviously can't spam rolls. They use too much stamina, and you'll be punished coming out of the roll. You'll get backstabbed out of the roll. You can't spam attacks except maybe with some of the faster weapons like the curved swords. Just really requires a lot more thinking and planning in your execution. I think probably the biggest difference, well, I wouldn't even say probably, I would say almost certainly the biggest difference though is the poise mechanic. And I could probably talk for hours just about this mechanic alone. I'm not still sure what to make of poise in general, meaning poise versus hyper armor. I think hyper armor is probably the better solution to how you manage things like hit stun and larger weapons. But I'm not convinced of that yet, and because I have so little time in this game, I certainly don't want to commit to one opinion or the other. I do think hyper armor at this point is probably better, but we'll see after I've got a couple hundred hours of invading whether I still think that's the case or not. And sort of playing in the background here, you can see some of my first invasions. This is a soul level 70 character. He's got sort of like the bare strength requirements to one hand the Black Knight sword, and then everything else is dumped into vitality and stamina. I think, well, that's a whole separate discussion. I'm not even going to get into the stamina and equip load changes. But sticking with poise, I think the poise is an interesting approach, and I have a much better understanding now of why it was that when Dark Souls 3 came out, people complained about the poise mechanic so much, because it is so different. And if you were accustomed to the poise mechanic of Dark Souls 1, I can definitely see why you'd be disappointed in the lack of a poise mechanic in Dark Souls 3. I had a lot of trouble coming into this game with the poise mechanic. It has really given me a lot of fits. And actually, the way that I've tried to adapt to it is to frame it in Dark Souls 3 terms, effectively to think of people as having perseverance all the time. And how would I approach a player that has perseverance? Well, that's essentially the way that I have to approach a player that's got a lot of poise. The problem is poise isn't obvious all the time. The Wolf Ring in particular gives people so much additional poise. It's hard to know how much poise somebody has, and obviously there's a number of different poise breakpoints, which I don't really have memorized at this point, but trying to get a feel for whether you're going to stagger your opponent or not. And a big problem I seem to be having is encountering players that have as much poise or more than I have, but their weapons outdamage me. And the Black Knight sword is slow enough that they can sort of trade on reaction. And if they're doing more damage than me, it causes me a lot of problems. So I almost feel like if I'm going to go with a poise heavy build like this one is, I think he's got like 78 poise, to just get over the 76 line. And this is really just me experimenting. I'm by no means like wedded to this. And here I see this guy spamming, so I'm already thinking I'm going to get a poise parry on him. But the problem is now that my health is already too low. So I didn't even really get a chance to try it. But I've kind of taken the attitude right now that I'm not really worried about winning and losing. I'm just trying to gather as much information, as much data as I possibly can to figure out what sorts of strategies work and which ones don't. I don't know. The game's been a lot of fun. I still at this point definitely prefer Dark Souls 3. I kind of conducted an informal poll during one of Saint's streams the other day to see how everyone else felt, and that kind of seemed to be the consensus. But then again, there's a selection bias in effect, because I think most of the players in Saint's stream are Dark Souls 3 players first and foremost. A lot of them are probably like me. They got their start in Dark Souls 3. And I've certainly noticed that players who got their start in Dark Souls 1 seem to favor it. And so it's hard to know if one's really sort of better than the other, or if you're just kind of going to tend to favor where you cut your teeth. It's really hard to say. But this build, I think I either need to commit to poise with something that can do higher DPS, or I probably need to go with a build that I don't put as much poison, but maybe I have a bit higher defenses. I don't really know much about how defense works in this game. So again, I'm really just still trying to kind of pick my way through all this and see what works best for me. I think one of the interesting things that I find myself thinking quite a bit about as I play through this game, and right there, that's a problem that I seem to be experiencing where I feel like I'm not actually seeing the animation or the damage actually occurs as the animation starts. That maybe wasn't the most egregious example of it, but it's happened to me enough times to make me feel like it's a real thing. Estus is really interesting too because when this game was made, I don't think invaders were able to Estus. And I used to wonder, like, God, that must have been a real penalty for invaders. But Estusing is so slow that when you invade a lone host, they pretty much can't Estus anyway. And so giving invaders on the one hand the ability to Estus, but giving hosts the ability to have more phantoms, I don't think those things balance out at all. I think, in fact, it makes things much, much harder on invaders. And from what I've seen from my other friends in their videos, I think raising the co-op limit without making fundamental gameplay changes to balance it out was a real mistake. I'm sure it's fun for people to summon all those their buddies, but I think it just makes things almost impossible on the actual invaders. I almost didn't make this video just because quite frankly, I'm pretty embarrassed by my gameplay here. I'm really, really bad at this game. And I have to say, it was a real surprise for me how bad I would be at the game compared to Dark Souls 3. And there, I felt like I should have rolled that attack, but I still got hit. It doesn't matter as this guy rolls off the cliff. There's just so many little things like that I'm trying to get used to that I just obviously don't understand yet. I mentioned the poise mechanic. Poise is a function of the player and their armor, not of the weapon that they're using, like hyper armor would be. And so you get all these sort of incongruous builds, at least to me they are, because they're really poisey and strong, but then they swing really fast weapons like this guy. Like this guy's obviously got a lot of poise, but then he's able to swing a curved sword. I can't interrupt him. And I just have a really hard time thinking how I'm going to approach a player like this. I still don't have the game plans worked out. I'm really just kind of trying to feel my way through this and just sort of accepting that I'm going to lose an awful lot. But it's frustrating because I find myself losing to players that I know. Like if I were fighting them in Dark Souls 3, I would almost certainly be better than them. I think probably the last thing I would point out, and it's obviously no secret, this game is really broken. And that doesn't mean it's not fun. I'm certainly having fun with it, and I expect I'll have fun with this for quite some time. But things like infinite stun lock, and yes, I'm aware of things like toggle escape, the glitch that lets you escape, but it really makes you wonder what From was thinking with weapons that could do things like infinite stun lock. And if you're a new player, you're not going to have any idea how to manage that. And even now, I have trouble with toggle escaping because the timing can sometimes be a little tricky and it's not second nature yet. So if I have to stop and think about it, I sometimes screw it up and get infinite stun locked. And then I get the giant dad hug at the end of it, which is pretty predictable. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think if you're interested in seeing more of this. If you'd rather see Dark Souls 3, I have not fired up Dark Souls 3 since I got this game. I've kind of decided that I'm going to at least get somewhat good with this game before I really come up with a final opinion and sort of decide which games I'm going to be playing. But I am having fun now. I'm having fun with the PvP. I'm having a lot of fun with the PvE. I did play this game once or twice back in the day. I played through on PvE, but never did any of the PvP. So this is all very much a first for me. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any particular types of videos you'd like to see or if there's any sorts of topics in which you're interested. And I'll certainly keep that in mind for future videos. Thanks for watching, guys.